Today we're going to analyze the poem Hap, which was written by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy was an English poet and writer of novels. And Hap is a poem that talks about the problem of chance and about things being left to blind chance and basically people coming to terms with that. Now, Hardy was 19 when On the Origin of Species was published, and he was deeply impressed by both Darwin and Spencer. Now, Spencer was a popularizer of Darwin, but Darwin himself, when On the Origin of Species was published, it was huge. It was an enormous success in terms of commercial success, and it also had a huge influence on intellectuals of the time in England and beyond. Now, Hardy was so impressed by Darwinism, which is actually a theory about how species come about, and it's particularly a theory that talks about the importance of brute chance events, about how the lives of animals and plants and human beings, who are also animals, is up to chance. And you can see these elements in Hardy's work. So, for example, there's lots of influence of brute chance events that play a huge role in the lives of the characters. So, for example, in the book Far from the Madding Crowd, you have this reversal of fortune through two chance events. So, one chance event is you have the shepherd, Gabriel Oak, who loses his entire flock because his dog chases the sheep off a cliff. And on the other hand, you have the other main character, who is Bathsheba Everdeen, and she is impoverished, but she comes into this huge inheritance, and all of a sudden she has a huge farm. And so you have all these chance events. You have a character called Boldwood, whose ultimate demise is precipitated by an innocuous practical joke, namely Bathsheba's Valentine card, leading him to believe that she loves him, and she doesn't, which leads him to basically ultimately go completely insane. So Hardy believed that the world was ultimately amoral and irrational, that there's no higher purpose to our actions, and that the world is indifferent to human concerns and desires. However, Hardy was not a nihilist. He thought that although the world is not concerned with us and evolutionary forces are driven by chance, we can still, through suffering, compassion, and self-knowledge, actively choose to contribute to other people's welfare. And this is actually a thought that you often see in atheists who find something profound and beautiful about natural selection, such as Richard Dawkins, who wrote in The Selfish Gene, "We alone on earth can rebel against the tyranny of the selfish replicators. We are not enslaved to our genes. We can choose to be better. We can surmount our biological nature." So humans can gradually improve their lot, and you can see that in the poem. So the poem, if you read it carefully, follows the almost classical form of a sonnet, 14 lines, and the form is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, F, E. Now the title is Hap, and Hap means coincidence, chance, or fortune. The word doesn't really exist on its own in contemporary English, although it survives in words like hapless, haphazard, and even happen. So what I want you to reflect on for this essay is the question of why Hardy would prefer there to be a God who wants the bad things that happen to him, all the bad fortune events, rather than blind chance that makes it happen. Would it so look at the motivations and about what he's thinking, and then in this reflective essay also think about William Rowe. So I'll just very briefly go over the paper by William Rowe. So William Rowe has this thought experiment of a fawn that is suffering and dying in a forest fire, and the fawn is trapped and it dies this slow, painful death. And I was reminded of that when I saw this really vivid imagery of the wildfires in Australia. A little koala in a burning forest, slowly suffocating, burning alive. And we feel a sense of compassion and dread when we see that. We want to alleviate the suffering. Now, if we human beings try to save these animals, and we are certainly not perfect, we eat meat and stuff like that, at least some of us. So if we want to do that, if we feel compassion with animals, why wouldn't God do the same? After all, God's even more powerful than we are. So that is basically what prompts William Rowe to his famous evidential argument from evil. So Rowe fully acknowledges that evil is logically compatible with God's existence. Like it's logically possible that God exists and evil exists. However, evidentially, it is the case that if you see evil, you think, well, this evil is just not evidentially compatible with the existence of an all-good and all-powerful God. So his argument is along the following lines. First premise, intense suffering exists that an all-good God could prevent without thereby losing some greater good. So, differently put, some suffering, like the suffering of that koala that I saw in the video, slowly choking to death in that forest in the Australian wildfire, well, God could have saved the koala or could have shortened its misery without any loss of greater good. An omniscient God would prevent this pointless suffering, and therefore there does not exist an omniscient God. Now, the theist might respond, look, there is a reason. There is some reason why God would have allowed for this that we just can't discern. However, Rowe says the atheist doesn't need 100% proof. The atheist just needs reasonable grounds for belief. And here it seems the atheist has reasonable grounds to accept. So, while it's not 100% sure that the existence of a God who has all these properties of being omniscient and omnibenevolent and omnipotent, and the suffering of that koala, it's reasonable to conclude that there is no God. So now, thinking about this dilemma of what the theist should do about this, Rowe offers a very interesting way out, which he calls the Moore shift, which is based on the British philosopher G.E. Moore. And G.E. Moore basically has the following shift. So it's something like, you could say, P, Q, therefore R, not R, Q, therefore not P. So basically, suppose that I say, I don't know that I'm being deceived by an evil demon. If I don't know that I'm being deceived, I don't know this pencil exists, hence I don't know this pencil exists. However, the Moore shift is something along the following line. I do know that this pencil, this chair I'm sitting in, anything exists. Now, if the skeptic is right, then I cannot know that I'm really in fact sitting in this chair. So, since I do know that I'm sitting in this chair, the skeptic's principles must be incorrect. So basically you start by denying the conclusion that an all-good, etc. God does not exist. So if you say God exists, God would prevent pointless suffering, therefore there is no pointless suffering. And that is why Rowe calls himself a friendly atheist. He says that, well, theists, I think, he says, that theists are mistaken in believing that God exists because of the strong evidential force of the problem of evil. However, theists can be reasonable if they find the existence of God so certain that it will lead them to question the idea that there is any pointless suffering. And that prefigures a lot of later discussion on reasonable disagreement. So, but it also connects in an interesting way to the topic we talked about earlier, namely the axiology of theism. What would you rather have? If, given that suffering exists, is it preferable that somehow an omniscient, etc. God would allow it? Or is it preferable that it's all up to chance? Now, Hardy argues that he would rather have, even though he's not a theist himself, he would rather have that it is caused by God, that there would be some God who wants all this. On the other hand, Rowe talks about how it's actually reasonable on the basis of this to conclude that there is no God. So those are the issues I want you to think about.